Redditors who have gone to war with a neighbor. What's your story? Had a shitty neighbor that lived downstairs. Did all sorts of loud shit late into the night. Usually music and friends. One day I had enough, and after about 10 minutes of very loud music I just started stomping on the floor. He came bursting out of his apartment and pounding on my door. I answered, acting very confused. You need to stop stomping around. I'm trying to work. I wasn't stomping. Yes you were. I was dancing to your shitty music. Turn it down and it'll never happen again. It never happened again. My parents' neighbor constantly blows his leaves onto my parents' property. My dad tried to confront him a few times and the guy literally ran away every time. Yes, a grown-ass man dropped his leaf blower and ran inside and locked the door and pretended not to be home when he saw my dad coming, on multiple occasions. My father is not a scary man. My dad was finally able to confront him one day. He was super polite and said the guy could blow the leaves into their woods, but just not onto their clean lawn. The guy responded, your property doesn't start until 10 feet from the road, so you can't do anything about it. If you want me to stop, sue me. This is technically correct, as the property is off a private road owned by a convent, and per state law the owner of the road also owns the 10 feet of land on either side of the road. So, my dad called up the convent and asked if the neighbor is allowed to dump his leaves on their property. Turns out they don't like that, so now instead of being in a neighborly argument with my parents, he's trying to fight a bunch of nuns in court. Not a good look. Live in a dorm with shared kitchen and toilet. One neighbor refused to buy toilet paper and always stole food. During a summer break only him and me were living at the dorm and he continued the practice, so I made some stew and put a lot of laxatives in it. I also left only one roll of toilet paper in the bathroom that was covered in itching powder. He was pissed, but I laugh whenever he tries to scold me for it. I don't get these people. Are you complaining that I put too much laxative on my food and too much itching powder on my toilet paper? It's more of a Cold War situation. When my boyfriend cuts the grass, even if our neighbor just cut his grass a few days prior, our neighbor, will cut his again the next day. He's an old man who can't stand to have his lawn just a smidge taller than ours. On a week-long cruise. First 2 mornings our neighbors on both sides were ridiculously loud, basically screaming in Spanish and constantly waking us up. We didn't go to bed until 3 to 4 am so they cut into your sleep. On third night at around 10 to 11 pm we go to our room, blasted the TV. Side note, TVs on cruises should be programmed to not go as loud as we made it, and left it like that until 3 to 4 am. You could hear it outside our door. It was very loud like they were. Next morning what do you know, the neighbors realized other people can hear them, and were quiet the rest of the cruise. When I was in elementary school, our neighbor's 4 dogs would always poop in our backyard. My mom asked the neighbor many times to pick it up, but he never did. So every morning before school, my mom would send me and my brother on poop patrol. At first we just put the poop in the neighbor's yard, but our neighbor never got the hint. My mom then had us put the poop on his porch and then he got offense. Looks like you needed a trebuchet, obviously the right siege weapon for the job. Capable of launching 90 kilograms of poop over 300 meters. Years ago, my upstairs neighbors were wanted felons living in an apartment leased by the lady's brother. They sold drugs out of there, they ducked all times of the day, loud music 8 am to 12 am, locked their daughter outside 4 hours at a time so we would do things with her and give her snacks, but you could tell her social and educational development was way behind. After finding their pictures online on the MN50 Most Wanted, I called the police and they didn't believe me. They called me a child. I was 22, all while the neighbors' behavior got worse as more people reported them. It took them 4 months and dozens of phone calls to finally get the police to arrest fugitives they were supposedly looking for. Well, it all started one day when they were having their fence put in, and one of the workers accidentally snapped one of our tomato plants at the base. So she decided to take it inside and cook all of the green tomatoes into this unbelievably yummy Indian food I can't even begin to pronounce or spell, and brought it over as an apology. Then we made fresh cut pasta and gave them some to give the container back, because we of course didn't want to keep it. Then they had the audacity to make us some Indian desert thing that tasted like heaven. By then our garden had started to produce, so we gave them 2 bags of produce that would have gone to waste, and they gave us some eggplant dish. So we brought over a tray of cookies, and now it's 3 years later and we are in a heated war over who can outfood the other. We're fighting a losing battle though, because they are vegetarian and we are not, so we have to modify most of what we make for them, but we have a huge vegetable garden so we have the leg up on that. My neighbor leaves trash in their yard. We have a HOA that is basically as feckless as possible. And this isn't some shitty neighborhood. We're talking 300k in Columbus, Ohio, which is about as upper middle class as you can get in the Midwest. They don't tie up their garbage bags, so some random shit falls out and blows into my yard. I took the 6 pieces I could find and duct taped them to their garage because I wanted them to be aware of the issue. For all of winter, they threw their plastic water bottles into a pile next to their garage, and it kept getting bigger and bigger until the snow melted and it was way too obvious, so they finally trashed it. And if all this is too specific, and my neighbor happens to read this, then clean up your trash, you ducking Van and Dursley looking duck. I lived next door to a cocaine club for years. They'd start up around 11 PM or midnight, and go till dawn. The cops, Brooklyn, were clearly on the take, as they'd repeatedly tell me during the day that the place had been closed down, and yet they were showing up 3 or 4 times a week there to deal with fights. I asked one of them about why they couldn't close the place at 4 AM one day after a particularly noisy fight, and they wouldn't even look me in the eye. We had a huge number of beer bottles because I also use the place as a performance rehearsal space, so at a certain point I'd start throwing bottles out my window to smash at their back door when they were noisy. They really hated that, but as I pointed out, what were they going to do? Call the cops? So they eventually managed to keep the noise down. It kinda worked out. Eventually they were gentrified out of existence. Apu, well, if the police won't help us, I guess we'll just have to take the law into our own hands. Chief Wiggum, yeah, a lot of people are doing that these days. Old neighbor from when I lived in town was the worst kind of neighbor. Loud all times of the night, no garbage service, too much traffic in and out to not be dealing drugs, and 2 pit bulls that were either locked inside or on a chain. Subsequently his dogs were not socialized and extremely aggressive. Both dogs would regularly get loose and attacked both my dog and myself. I had a 4-foot chain link fence around my whole yard for my dog, but his dogs would easily jump the fence, then attack my dog. After speaking with him several times, calling the police, animal control etc., I told him I would defend my dog if he wasn't going to control his. Less than a month after that conversation, his dogs again jumped the fence and attacked my dog, this time causing severe damage to my dog, emergency vet visit, and he nearly died. He learned I was good to my word that day. Edit, because I keep getting this question, I shot them, they are both dead, not something I am proud of. Background, I use my bicycle to ride to the train station pretty much every day. Having to go over the sidewalk for a grand amount of 10 meters before entering the street. Edit, since many people think I go fast over the sidewalk. I go as fast as a normal person walks on my bicycle, not being unreasonably fast. If I were to put 1 foot on the sidewalk, I'd stand still instantly. One day he comes at me and accuses me of almost hitting him with my bicycle. Now I have no idea what he talked about since I've never been anywhere close to him, but he insists on it. Fast forward a few weeks, he complains again that everybody keeps riding their bicycle on the sidewalk, and he's scared for his life that people will hit him because he's deaf on one ear. He also doesn't look where he goes, instead trusts his other ear, but that's outside the story. After that I talked with him so that he would stop complaining, saying I would go very slow and in front of his house, I would watch out for him. Fast forward 2 months, and suddenly a mediator shows up that my neighbor wants to talk, but doesn't want to do it alone. They keep adding up here since we talked about it before. I said that if he wants to talk, he can just knock on the door and we will talk. Never had a problem with him before, so no idea why he would now. Nothing came from that. Fast forward another 2 months and suddenly police shows up at the door. Neighbor has filed a complaint to not only me, but also my other neighbor, who by the way does not even know how to ride a bicycle, about riding on the sidewalk and nearly hitting him. Explained the story to the police and they were nice and helpful and understood my point. They advised to be careful around his house, which I already was. Another month later another mediator shows up. Wants to talk with us together, and at this point I refuse it. He's had plenty of opportunities. This was 2 months ago, I wonder when his next complaint will be. Dog kept chewing through old fence, kept coming up with excuses why he wouldn't pay his half to replace the fence. We shouldn't have had to pay any of it, since it would have been structurally fine if his dog didn't keep chewing holes in it and escaping into our backyard. We decided to start leaving our side gate open. The dog would chew through and then go wandering through the neighborhood. After the third pickup from the pound, he decided to buy scrap wood and patch up the holes. Back in like 2009 to 2010, I was at war with my downstairs neighbor. She would hit her ceiling with a broomstick, and I would point my bass speaker down toward the floor. I got pregnant with twins that were high risk, and got a temporary handicapped placard for parking closer. She borrowed one and took my spot. Few months go by of straight war, then I had my twins. I'll be damned if we didn't stop ducking with each other, and that woman was the only person to help me. We became best friends, and still are to this day. We still laugh at our silly war. Thank you Heather. Who made the first conciliatory gesture? Did the other one accept it as a truce, or assume that it was part of the ongoing hostilities? Had there been an initial miscommunication? My washing machine had flooded her kitchen, and she came up to scream at me for ruining her dinner. I yelled back at her saying that I totally did it on purpose. I mean come on lady, she laughed. I laughed, and she asked to see the babies. They were in their swings in her line of sight, and just like that, it was over.